So everyone, just a little warning before we get started. I understand that Halloween can be a stressful time for us all. Now I'm not talking about the ghouls and goblins that like to walk the streets at night. No, I'm talking about accidentally purchasing fun-sized chocolate bars. You see, let me paint you a picture. My fiancé comes in with a bag full of goodies and pops into the fridge what I believe is a large box of full-size Snickers. After 2 hours, I shove my chubby little hand into the fridge, and what do I bring out with me? This, a 99 calorie chocolate bar. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I think I can taste that it's 99 calories. I mean, I'm still gonna eat it, but that's not the point. Hey there guys, my name's Megan if you're new here, and if not, welcome back for episode 39 of Killer Weekend, where each week we'll discuss a true crime case, and you guys can feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments box below. I would move my eyebrows a wee bit better than that, but unfortunately the Botox doesn't really let that happen. If you like all things true crime, supernatural, UFO, conspiracy theory, and all that good stuff in between, then please hit that subscribe button. I'll be here for you every Friday with our True Crime Killer Weekends, and on and off every couple of Wednesdays with our Weirdo Wednesdays, where we'll discuss something spooky I've heard. I will leave a small disclaimer at the beginning of this episode. It does involve details of violent crime and also crimes against a child. If that's a trigger point for you, then please feel free to turn away now. Hello my pretties, I missed you so very much. I really didn't like taking time off from you, and I can tell from the comments that you didn't like it either. But we're back with a bang, and it's almost spooky season. Now, if you've visited my channel before, then you'll know that I usually fill the first 2 minutes with absolute fodder, but I'm not really feeling in a very funny mood today, and I'm sure a lot of women out there will know why. You see, after sadly the remains of 22-year-old Gabby Petito were found in the US, we had a tragedy of our own here in the UK. A young 28-year-old teacher named Sabina Nessa was sadly found in a park in Lewisham, only 10 minutes away from her home. It would have taken Sabina 10 minutes to walk from her flat to a bar where she was planning on meeting a friend. Now, a 36-year-old man has been arrested in connection to the murder of Sabina, but we're still left asking why another one of our sisters, our friends, our mothers, or daughters, why are these women being snatched on the street? After the remains of Sabina were found, police in London were warning young women to not walk alone in the dark and also handing out assault alarms. You can understand our frustration here in the UK when every October the sun starts to set at 4 p.m, so literally we shouldn't leave our houses. This is no longer a female problem. We are not the ones doing anything wrong, and by using language like that, like women shouldn't be going out after a certain time, how's about men just shouldn't be attacking and raping women? No? Okay. But I do think that there are things that can be put into place in order to stop the cycle of violence against women. One, education in schools. We've spoken about this on the channel before. The fact that when we were in schools, we were taught how to not get spiked on a night out. I never leave home without my thumb over a bottle. Education is so key because a lot of these offenders are born into violent homes and have no real way of knowing what they're experiencing at home isn't normal and isn't okay. 1 in 5 women will be sexually assaulted, and 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence. 1 in 5 is an awful statistic in itself, but if you actually consider that only 19% of sexual assaults are reported each year, this is just the tip of the iceberg. How many of these people are reoffending? To anyone out there who's been affected by these issues, I've placed the names of some amazing organisations in the description box below. Please get in touch, even if it's just to talk to someone. But without further delay, we'll get into this week's case. If you were an 80s or 90s child like myself, then the initials WWE will be a staple in your childhood. The WWE, known as the World Wrestling Entertainment, formerly known as the World Wrestling Federation, WWF, before the guys with the pandas took it over, was for us oldies a place of magic, a place of melodrama, and a little bit of masculinity. I don't know one boy on my school playground who didn't have his very own Triple H doll or his shiny plastic championship belt with him. And then when women started coming onto the wrestling scene, there was a wee bit of something for everyone. My personal favourite was Kelly. She was like a big blonde Barbie who could kick butt. Kinda like Buffy, but a wee bit more glam. I loved her. I loved The Undertaker for the dark and spooky vibes, and also John Cena for personal reasons. So many young kids within my generation looked up to these athletes, performers, however you want to call them. And I know despite the warnings from your mum and the TV screen, you would always want to attempt these death-defying moves with you and your friends. And we were quite lucky. More often than not, you would end up with a few bruises and that was that. But for the people performing these dangerous stunts on TV for our entertainment, they weren't always so lucky. And what may have seemed like harmless fun to you and me watching on, left behind a trail of death, destruction, and in one case, murder. This week, we will be discussing the case of Chris Benoit, Family Annihilator. Chris Michael Benoit was born on the 21st of May 1967 to his parents Margaret and Michael Benoit. He was the first of two children and later would have a sister named Laurie. He was born in Montreal in Canada but would soon relocate to Edmonton in Alberta. Chris's childhood got off to quite a rocky start, and at the age of 6 he was in a serious car accident. He was left with some minor brain injuries, but let's just remember that, shall we? Christopher, nicknamed Chris by friends and family, was raised in quite a strict Catholic household. His father, Michael, was a man's man, and Chris was quite quiet, quite introverted, kept himself to himself, and enjoyed reading. But Michael wanted him to get into some more manly sports. So what did he do? He decided to take his young son at the age of 12 to a wrestling competition. What was quite odd in an eerie kind of way is that Michael actually didn't really like wrestling himself at all. He was just looking for some common ground with his almost teenage son at the time, and later he would go on to say that he had wished he'd never taken Chris at all. Whilst 12-year-old Chris sat there looking up from the crowd, there was two athletes that stood out to him that day. A man named Tom Billington, also nicknamed the Dynamite Kid, and Bret Hart from the notorious Hart family. Throughout the years, Chris would begin to collect wrestling memorabilia, and he pretty much idolised Tom Billington and Bret Hart. Bret Hart, fair play, but Tom Billington, he wasn't really known as a great guy. He was known to be quite abusive and quite aggressive. Even when young fans would approach him in the street, he would allegedly attack them. You know what they say, never meet your hero. In 1987, Tom Billington experienced quite a serious back injury, and without even being able to walk, he checked himself out of the hospital and attended a match with the Hart family. This was something that was quite the norm within the wrestling world, because if you didn't turn up, you didn't get paid, and there was a big chance that you could be replaced. Over the next few years in his career, Tom would develop a dependency on anabolic steroids, speed, LSD, and his body would obviously suffer from this, so it's no surprise that he had several seizures before his final match in October 1996. Tom Billington was always known as kind of a villainous character within the wrestling world, but to Chris, this man was his idol. Not only did he love his wrestling style, but he liked the fact that he wasn't the biggest guy in the world. You see, Tom was relatively small within the wrestling world. You have the likes of Hulk Hogan, who was 6'7", and The Rock, who was 6'5". Tom Billington was only 5'9", so for a small guy like Chris, this was something to aspire to for him. Chris looked at this man and what he'd achieved professionally and thought to himself, I only need to want it enough. And trust me, he wanted it badly. A young Chris would watch back-to-back tapes of his favourite wrestlers and see if he could perform their tricks and what techniques they used. There's a massive misconception within the world of wrestling and the people who watch it that think that this is all fake, all smoke and mirrors, and that's simply not the case. case. These people, especially if you're lucky enough to get within the WWE, are extremely talented athletes. They train every day, sometimes more than 3 times a day. They have a special diet. They're not really meant to take drugs, but we all know that happens. Any wrestling buff knows that the moves are choreographed and that the winners are already predetermined by producers and bookers behind the scenes, but there are some things that one just can't fake. Such as jumping from the top of the ring onto a cold hard floor, falling onto a wooden table, or my personal favourite, the chair. It wasn't a WWE match unless someone was getting smacked in the back of the skull by a foldable steel chair now, was it? It's also important to remember that accidents can happen. Some people trip, some miss their cues, and for some, these accidents can be deadly. During the 1999 Over the Edge pay-per-view event, WWE legend Owen Hart, brother of Bret Hart, was meant to be lowered onto the ring via a harness. But something malfunctioned, something went wrong, and this led the cable holding Owen to snap, leaving him plunging 80 feet to his death. It was said that he died on impact, leaving thousands of viewers absolutely devastated. However, these kind of risks didn't put a young Chris Benoit off. In fact, his father purchased him his first set of weights so that he could begin training professionally. But despite having smaller role models like Tom Billington, young Chris still felt pretty insecure about his small stature, and for that reason, at the age of 16, he began taking anabolic steroids. Anabolic steroids, however, can actually stun a boy's natural growth, so therefore he was making himself bigger but actually smaller at the same time. Anabolic steroids often come with the stigma of leading to a certain something we like to call roid rage. Now, scientifically, it's not actually been proven that increased testosterone leads to angry or aggressive behaviour. In fact, medical professionals do actually say that with those suffering from roid rage, it actually says more about their own personal behaviour rather than the medication they're taking. It's safe to say that anabolic steroids are popular within a certain group of people. We've all been in our local gym and seen those guys standing in front of the mirror, flexing, lifting their tops, and yes, it probably has more to do with the fact that certain men are of a narcissistic nature, making them less likely to accept rejection well and classically more aggressive. However, as young Chris Benoit was still developing when he was taking the performance enhancement drugs, we could also argue with the fact that he was insecure to begin with, and the side effects of anabolic steroids probably made this worse later down the road. You see, even though roid rage isn't a classic symptom of steroid use, there is other ones that are slightly less flattering. You've got shrunken testicles, you've got receding hairline, male pattern baldness, adult onset acne, and also my personal favourite, excess breast tissue, or as you and I would say, moobs. So probably not the best thing for someone with body issues to take, but this was the 1980s and it was as readily available as cough syrup in your local chemist. Chris's father, Michael, would say that he saw a definite shift in Chris when he began attending the Archbishop O'Leary Catholic High School. He would later describe Chris's interest in wrestling at this time as an obsession. Chris would soon gain quite a lot of muscle, and with this he was able to take part in wrestling and bodybuilding competitions, and when he left high school in 1985, he was lucky enough to gain a place training within the notorious Hart Dungeon in Calgary. The Hart Mansion, which was owned by Stu Hart, who was the father of the late Owen Hart and Bret Hart, had a reputation for its sick and sadistic practices. It was even described by some wrestlers as a torture chamber, but Chris seemed to thrive in this kind of environment and he really impressed Stu, which is why he was accepted into the Stampede Wrestling promotion after his graduation. Chris was a quick and fierce fighter, and because of his small stature, he was able to move quicker around the ring than some of his other opponents. This earned him the nickname of Dynamite, an homage to his favourite wrestler, Tom Billington. During his time at Stampede, Chris was able to win 4 Commonwealth British titles and also 4 tag team titles, so he was thriving. In 1986, 1989, Chris then moved on to the New Japan Pro Wrestling Company. In this promotion, Chris changed up his style quite a lot. He wore a mask and he also was given the name the Pegasus Kid. It was whilst training within Nakano, Japan that he met an ally, a man named Eddie Guerrero. At that time in his career, Eddie Guerrero was performing under the alias of the Black Tiger and he was also wearing a mask. However, the two men couldn't have been more different, with Guerrero being highly religious and also he was a born performer. And then you had Chris, who considered himself an atheist despite his religious upbringing, and also he was quite a quiet guy. Yeah, he came alive on stage, but it wasn't as natural to him as it seemed to be for Eddie. But somehow it seemed to work, and despite their friendship, it didn't seem to affect their relationship in the ring. If anything, their matches were said to be the most vicious at the time. They would just get in there and knock lumps out of each other. I don't know, men are strange. They can fight and then shake hands the next minute. In 1988, Chris also married his long-term girlfriend Martina, and the two went on to have two children, a son named David and a daughter named Megan. Love that name. Chris's career at this time moved from strength to strength, with stints within the World Championship Wrestling and Extreme Championship Wrestling. However, tragedy struck when in 1994 a crucial move gone wrong earned Chris his notorious nickname. During a match with wrestler Sabu in the November to Remember event, Chris made a crucial error, which left Sabu landing on his head and breaking his neck. Chris was devastated. It was said that when he went backstage, he was sobbing, he was erratic, he was absolutely racked with guilt. But it wasn't really the feeling of everyone else around Chris. Show organisers would say to Chris that it wasn't a bad thing at all, and if anything, it would make him seem more aggressive and be great for his reputation, and they therefore gave him the nickname of the Canadian Crippler. Luckily, Sabu would recover, but it is an event that Chris would never forget. Not making any inappropriate jokes, we don't do that here. But it is slightly strange that the event was called November to Remember. In the early 2000s, Chris decided to make a change, and this is when he moved to the WWE, then known as the WWF. He did super well when he moved to this promotion, even joining a tag team alongside best friend Eddie Guerrero. Chris Benoit was many things, but he was well known for being an extremely hard worker, sometimes a little too hard. Obviously, within this world of WWE, it's basically a game of favourites, and there's no time off, no personal time for these athletes. They're either in the gym or they're on the road, and when they sustain injuries, that's a whole other story, because of course they can rest up at home, but they still run the risk of being replaced by many of the WWE wannabes waiting in the wings. It was said that unfortunately Chris would receive several blows to the back of his head that were left ultimately untreated out of fear of being booted off of the WWE promotion. Whilst Chris's professional career went from strength to strength, unfortunately his personal life was soon to take a nosedive. In 1997, a fellow wrestler and booker, Kevin Sullivan, decided that he wanted to spice things up with a juicy storyline about Chris and his own wife. Therefore, they would set up scenarios. Chris and this mystery woman would be seen outside holding hands coming out of hotels. They'd also be seen dining together in restaurants. And one person who wasn't a big fan of this, shockingly enough, was Chris's actual wife, Martina. A then pregnant Martina Benoit wasn't really best pleased with her husband gallivanting about town with his pal's wife, and she was right to be concerned, because within a short period of time, fiction turned into fact. And when Kevin Sullivan's wife Nancy left him to be with Chris Benoit in 1997, Kevin Sullivan would forever be known as the man who orchestrated his own divorce. It's like those people who go on Temptation Island. Just don't tempt fate. If you dangle a carrot in front of a horse's face, they're gonna eat it. Chris Benoit left his wife Martina, and in the year of 2000 he married Nancy Sullivan and made her Nancy Benoit. In the February of that year, the couple welcomed their very own beautiful baby boy, a son named Daniel. And I bet you're all sitting there thinking, what could go wrong? Sounds picture perfect. Probably not, because Nancy, you see, she was a very complex woman. Nancy was well known as a booker within the wrestling world herself. However, she had quite a niche nickname that the men would call her within the wrestling companies. They simply referred to her as Woman. A nickname that apparently Nancy loved. Just doing great things for women everywhere at the time, yes. Chris and Nancy's relationship, even though it seemed great to those watching on screen, was undeniably fractured when in 2003 Nancy filed for divorce and also filed a restraining order against her husband, citing that he was a violent man who would often throw things at her. During the separation, however, Chris would beg for Nancy's forgiveness, and sadly she relented. If only she had known, had she stayed away, she may have still been alive today. The Benoit family had everything that you and I could want. They had amazing cars. I mean, they literally could have driven a car every day of the week and still had some left over. They had their beautiful home in Georgia, and they had their gorgeous little boy. Nancy was a devoted mother, and Chris a devoted family man and career man. But for them, their perfect and picturesque lifestyle was soon to change forever, when on November 13th, 2005, Eddie Guerrero died of acute heart failure at the age of 38, leaving behind his devastated wife and 3 distraught young children. Chris was said to be completely inconsolable at this time, and was even said to be in a catatonic state. When Nancy, who was friends with Eddie's widow, Vicky, attended her home to help her with the children and just make some meals for her, the two women heard a man sobbing in their upstairs bedroom. When they went to investigate, they then found Chris in Eddie's bed, laying on his side of the bed, smelling his pillow, sobbing into it. Many wrestlers and co-workers would state that because Chris was so devastated at the loss of his friend, it almost appeared like he had lost a spouse himself. Not only this, a few months prior to his death, Eddie had gifted Chris with a Bible, and he took it everywhere, even before Eddie had passed away. This was Chris's security blanket, which led to speculation that Chris's love for Eddie ran a little bit deeper than friendship. Chris was also said to have become quite paranoid during this time. He always feared that someone was following him and his family, and because of this, he would often print out several different map routes so that he always had a different way to get to the airport. He never wanted anyone to be able to track his movements, and that included his cars. He would switch up his cars every couple of days out of the fear that someone was tracking them. This must have been really hard for Nancy to watch as a wife. She was watching him on stage commanding this audience, and then when he got home, he could barely speak 2 words to her. In the wake of Eddie's death, Chris became quite close to Eddie's nephew Chavo. Now, Chavo was also a professional wrestler and could understand what Chris was going through at the time. The two were training together, hanging out on a daily basis. So when Chris phoned Chavo stating that he was going to be late for an event because his wife Nancy and his then 7-year-old son Daniel were feeling under the weather, he was quite alarmed. It wasn't like Chris to miss events, especially just if his wife and child were feeling quite poorly. When Chavo called Chris back, he said that Chris seemed quite drowsy and wasn't really making much sense, but Chris agreed that he would meet up with Chavo in Houston to attend the Vengeance Night of Champions event. He said that he would pick him up at 8 AM at the airport, and then Chris said that he was planning to change his flight for Delta Airlines. But Chris had a secret, you see. As he spoke calmly to his friend on the phone, his 43-year-old wife Nancy lay only feet away from him, dead. At 3:54 AM on the 24th of June, 5 text messages would be sent out from Nancy and Chris's cell phones to both Scott Armstrong, a WWE referee, and also to Chavo. The text stated that the Benoit family dogs would be in an enclosed pool area and that the side door for the garage would be left open. The next set of texts read the full address of where the Benoits were staying in Fayetteville, Georgia. As it was the middle of the night, Chavo said that he kind of half read the message, still half asleep, and went back to bed as he was scheduled to pick Chris up that morning at 8 a.m. from the airport, a meeting that Chris would never make. The last known outside contact from Chris Benoit was actually to the WWE Talent Relations Office. He was claiming that his wife Nancy and his son Daniel were experiencing very bad food poisoning, so much so that they began vomiting up blood. When Monday the 25th rolled in with still no correspondence from Chris, this pushed Chavo to finally admit the strange text messages he had received. This led WWE bosses to contact Georgia authorities to perform a welfare check on the family home at around 12:45 p.m. that afternoon. At 2:30 p.m, officers arrived on scene and they noted that the family's neighbour, Holly Strepfer, was in their yard. She'd apparently heard the dogs barking profusely and wanted to see what it was all about. Now, the weird thing is, at this point, police do something that you probably wouldn't really want them to do. They actually asked Holly if she would go into the residence herself. Unfortunately, because of this move, it meant that Holly was the one to enter the home and discover that Daniel was dead. She was seen running from the home, screaming Daniel's dead, and this led police to then go in and discover the body of 43-year-old Nancy Benoit. On the second floor of the Benoit's stunning family home, they found Nancy bound by her hands and feet and strangled. They then walked along to 7-year-old Daniel's bedroom, which was plastered with his father's WWE memorabilia, in which they found him deceased, having been drugged with Xanax and smothered. Officers walked through the home looking at all the state-of-the-art electronics, all the newest furniture, the best gym equipment, but it was only when they entered the family's home gym that they realised the horror of this event. There, hanging from a weight machine with a fashioned noose, was 38-year-old Chris Benoit. The pressure and the weight of the machine had snapped his neck. At 4 p.m, the WWE organisation received a phone call from the sheriff's office confirming that all 3 of the family members had died. However, they never went into the specifics, so that night when the WWE arranged a very impromptu memorial episode, it was a little bit premature, and it showed several of Chris's friends from the wrestling world talking about their memories of Chris, this amazing, heroic man. Of course, when the WWE learned of what actually took place in that house, they erased every single mention of Chris Benoit. He was the WWE's secret shame at the time. After an investigation with the county sheriff, it appeared that Chris had murdered his family over a course of 3 days. He had then taken his own life in a tragic case of murder-suicide. So there we have it. Case closed, right? Not really, because like many Chris Benoit supporters and conspiracy theorists, several armchair detectives have gathered their own evidence and have their own opinions on this case. Some are quite plausible and others are downright strange. The first theory that comes to mind is the conspiracy theory that Chris and his family were murdered and then framed by someone within the WWE themselves. People come to this conclusion for many a reason, one being a strange Wikipedia update only 12 hours before police arrived on scene. The Wikipedia update claimed that Chris was unable to make an event that day because his wife had passed away. This is before anyone knew the fate of Nancy, and the location when the IP address was tracked for this Wikipedia update led law enforcement to Stamford, Connecticut, home of WWE headquarters. However, these theories have been debunked because the man who allegedly wrote the Wikipedia post was taken in and interviewed by police. He admitted to writing this post, but he often wrote several kind of fan fiction posts on other people's Wikipedia pages, and it just so happens that this was one claim he made on Wikipedia that had actually come true. So say we're throwing that one out, we're ignoring that. We also have the fact that another wrestler was allegedly on site before police arrived. Yes, you see, the neighbour who identified the bodies of Chris Benoit and their family that day said that as she ran out of the house, traumatised from seeing the family deceased, she saw wrestler Dave Taylor and his wife carrying a tray of food and deli meats towards the Benoit home. Now, this isn't the strangest thing, because obviously at this point WWE knew something was wrong. If Dave Taylor lived nearby, it would make sense for him to go and check on his buddy, right? But the weirdest thing is that Dave Taylor completely denies ever being there, as does his wife. They say they were in Texas at the time, a point that has never been proven either way. The neighbour of the Benoits still states that she's adamant she definitely saw Taylor and his wife. But if those theories are a little bit, far-fetched for you, we also have the theory of the jilted lover. Now remember Kevin Sullivan, Nancy's ex-husband? Well, he had a little bit of a dark stage presence. He liked to perform as a satanic worshipper. But people like Hulk Hogan would say that Nancy and Kevin took their on-screen behaviour a little bit seriously off-screen as well. Another former wrestler turned minister, Johnny Angel, would also say that he believed that Kevin was in charge of a satanic faction and that they had organised and killed the Benoit family, framing Chris Benoit. Now, we all have to take what Johnny Angel says with a pinch of salt, because he's also a self-confessed ex-KKK member. So there's that. A large kitchen knife, which was found under the bed of the Benoit's 7-year-old son Daniel, was never used in the crime allegedly and was wiped completely clean of any fingerprints. Is this just a coincidence? And what was that young boy doing with a knife under his bed? We also have to take into consideration this was around 10-11 years after Nancy and Kevin split. Was he really that bitter over his ex-wife? Something that added to this claim of a satanic cult breaking into the Benoit home was the fact that there was a rumour circulating online that Chavo had heard an intruder when he was on the phone to Chris earlier the day before he died. However, Chavo has always denied this. This was not a real quote from Chavo, and it's just something that sadly is a myth and has been circulating online. People also believe the home invasion theory because Chris Benoit and Daniel were said to both have Xanax in their system, the sedative. However, it is said that Chris Benoit was taking a medley of drugs at the time, also including Xanax, so it's not the strangest thing in the world that he would have this in his system. Having done a deep Atlantic-style ocean dive on this case, I think the most plausible theory is that of the county sheriff. Several friends of Nancy and her sister would later go on to say that she was extremely unhappy in the marriage. We know that she filed for divorce and filed that restraining order in 2003. Did things improve in the marriage? On Thursday, the 21st of June, the day before Nancy was murdered, she was said to have called a close family friend and told her that she was scared of Chris and that if anything happened to her, she was to contact police and they were to look at Chris. So already, massive red flag right there. It was also said that Chris had committed these murders over the course of 3 days. On Friday the 22nd of June, Chris made the 40-mile drive to his doctor, a Dr. Phil Aston III, and this man is proof that you can't buy morals. You see, Dr. Phil Aston appeared to have a never-ending prescription pad, and on several occasions he prescribed 10 months worth of steroids to Chris over a 4-week period. And I know you're probably sitting there thinking, he was an athlete. How did he get away with being on all those prescription drugs? And you see, ladies and gentlemen, that's because the WWE at the time had a sneaky little loophole that managed to get the guys off scot-free when they tested positive for drugs. Unlike most national sporting events, wrestling is classed as an entertainment system, not as a sport, so therefore the men weren't legally required to be drug tested. When they eventually did bring in drug testing, it was very wishy-washy, and as long as your prescriptions had been written on a doctor's pad, it didn't matter. You could take whatever you wanted. And we all know there's doctors out there who will do anything for a bit of money. Well, Dr. Phil was one of those guys, and this is how Chris Benoit was able to maintain his addiction to anabolic steroids throughout his WWE career. After picking up his prescription, Chris then drove home and had a late evening barbecue with his son Daniel. A neighbour only saw Daniel and Chris in the garden, so it is possible that Nancy may have been lying dead upstairs as Chris cooked his food with his 7-year-old son. After strangling Nancy in one of their bedrooms, he then slept only doors away from Nancy's deceased body. Chris was not handling the death of Eddie Guerrero well at all either. He was said to be drinking heavily, and this was causing several arguments between he and Nancy. Remember guys, we also spoke about that Bible that he would carry with him absolutely everywhere, his security blanket that was given to him by Eddie himself. Well, is it just a coinkydink that his family were each found with their own Bible laying next to their deceased bodies? And on the topic of Bibles, remember Chris's ex-wife Martina? She was living in Canada with their 2 children when after his death she received a Bible, the very Bible that he held on to so tightly. It was said that when she opened the Bible she noticed a scroll of paper stuck inside which read, "I'm preparing to leave this world." Was that a suicide note from Chris, or was it just the scrollings of a madman? There's many signs that point to Chris's guilt, and some of them could perhaps explain why this loving, warm family man turned into a cold-blooded family annihilator. During his professional career, Chris took many a blow to the head, and it does leave one wondering, can we really come out of that kind of injury unscathed? History would suggest no, because there is scientific fact that links serious criminals to brain trauma. We have the likes of Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker, we have BTK, also known as Dennis Rader, and we have the son of Sam, also known as David Berkowitz. I really could go on. Buy your kids helmets, guys. Is it possible this could be the explanation everyone's looking for as to how he could have done this to his family? His family certainly thinks so, especially when an ex-wrestler, Christopher Nowinski, approached them stating he may have an answer as to why Chris committed these murders. Based on a post-mortem study done of Chris Benoit's brain by the Sports Legacy Institute, his brain was showing signs of severe trauma. It was showing that at the time of the murders, Chris was suffering from CTE. Now, I'm not a doctor. I will mispronounce the last word because literally I've looked it up on Google about 17 times and it still doesn't make any sense in my brain. CTE, also known as chronic traumatic encephalopathy. That's not right, is it? Anyway, CTE is a form of serious brain damage which is common in boxers, wrestlers and American football players. Now, I will say that Aaron Hernandez had CTE and we all know what happened to him if you watch Netflix. Upon examination of his brain tissue, it was said that Chris's brain was in the same condition as an 85-year-old dementia patient. Now, what symptoms of CTE could lead to a crime like this, you ask? Well, actually, they kind of go hand in hand with violent crime. You see, it causes memory loss, disorientation, paranoia. People suffering from CTE are unable to use proper judgment skills, and it also can lead to extreme aggression. If this was the cause of Chris's mental break, it's kind of ironic that the WWE would block him out of all existence from their Hall of Fame, when really it was their impossible work schedule and dangerous work environment that caused these eternal injuries. Still to this day, there is no positive mention of Chris Benoit on the WWE website. His son David, who's later gone on to be a wrestler himself, hopes that one day his father will be reinstated into their Hall of Fame. If we believe the timestamp of the coroner of when Nancy and Daniel were both savagely murdered, we would also have to believe that he took 3 days to kill his family. He had 3 days time in which he was calling friends. He was seen outside the home walking around, which also debunks the home invasion theory. If someone was keeping him captive inside the home, how was he allowed to call and text his friends and also walk around the neighbourhood? No matter what side you sit on or how you feel about this case, to you, Chris Benoit will always be one of two things: either mentor or monster. I hope you guys have enjoyed this week's case. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up for me. If you're feeling extra fancy, then also hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. If you're watching this episode and I've not irritated you too much that you want to give me a tombstone pile driver, all those Undertaker fans out there will know what I'm saying. Then please hit that subscribe button. I'll be here for you every Friday with our True Crime Killer weekends and on and off every couple of Wednesdays with our Weirdo Wednesdays. We have a really exciting lineup coming up in the next few weeks, guys. It's coming up for spooky season, so I hope you're all as ready as I am. I'm ready. I was born ready. If you're looking at me and thinking, she looks interesting, you're dead wrong, but you can feel free to follow me. Not home, remember, on Instagram at Megan True Crime. I also have a wee TikTok page at Megan.TrueCrime. Do you know what I was just thinking? Remember when we used to watch the wrestling and about 2 days before they'd have a big match, they'd all start trash talking each other on telly? That was brilliant. I'm gonna eat you and grind you into a paste. I'll stop rambling right there. I love you all, and remember, lock your doors. Don't talk to strangers. And if one of your neighbours says they've got food poisoning, don't bring a tray of deli meats, Dave Taylor, even though allegedly you didn't. So from me and my tiny chocolate bar, see ya! I'm still gonna eat it, yay! Cheers.